Are fifth-generation consoles worth buying in 2023 and beyond? Let's find out. The fifth generation of video game systems is one that has been long gone, one that had a lifespan of approximately 13 years, from 1993 to early 2006. The many that had sprung into existence includes the original PlayStation, also known as the PlayStation 1, as well as Sega's Saturn console, the Nintendo 64, the Atari Jaguar, and the 3D interactive player game console, which is probably by far the least well-known out of all the consoles mentioned. The original PlayStation was the most successful out of all units, and they ended up having the largest market of games as a result, but the Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn were also very well received, and this era was notably also having the 32-bit and 64-bit architecture. 64-bit was uncommon back in the day, however, the succeeding generation which would eventually follow the 5th-gen consoles, the 6th-gen consoles, came along, and was a major improvement for the time, and the 7th-gen consoles, which came around the mid-2000s, further improved upon graphics, simulation, and physics, but the engines behind all video games have also been advancing, but now, things have slowed down dramatically and have since not improved a whole lot. Take the 8th-gen to 9th-gen consoles, not a lot has changed, aside from the visual design of these consoles and the new games specifically for the newer gen of consoles. The 5th generation was also notably the first to heavily rely on the use of optical media for the video games that you could play. However, both the Atari Jaguar and the Nintendo 64 relied on cartridges. The interactive 3D player, Sega Saturn, and PlayStation 1 did not rely on cartridges. The PlayStation 1 was also notable for its heavy security features. Built into the PlayStation's OS, it prevented people who had copied and burned an identical copy of the video game onto a DVD or CD. The PlayStation would recognize it as being a counterfeit copy of the game. You can think of this as being like counterfeit money, and the person handling the money can clearly see that it's quite obviously fake money, and not the real thing. Well, you had that problem in the video game market too, and no others at the time were renowned for protecting against illegal copies of those discs. Cartridges were of course unhackable, and were much harder to get data off of, whereas a CD or DVD could easily be used with a capable computer that had a CD/DVD drive, most of which did. However, floppy was still the norm for PCs around 1993 and 1996, the years that all of the consoles launched. Speaking of which, the 3D player was first and hit the scene in October 1993, followed by the Atari Jaguar about 2 months later. The Wii had the PlayStation in December 1994, followed by Sega Saturn in May 1995, and the Nintendo was the last to be launched. It debuted for sale in September 1996. The original PlayStation also had the longest lifespan. It lived until early 2006, so it had 12 years of production and sale, and the most popular games for it were the original Gran Turismo and Crash Bandicoot. The 5th generation was a massive leap forward from the previous generation, the 4th generation of game consoles, and what would follow the 5th generation was an even more successful follow-up, the 6th gen, which notably had less consoles overall, but all were well received and are still loved by many retro enthusiasts who love older game consoles. So, are 5th gen consoles worth buying in 2023 and beyond? Well, considering the age of them, it would be significantly problematic to obtain one. However, a good chunk of older games and game consoles can be found on places such as eBay or Amazon. Some sites are dedicated to selling old games and consoles for those who are into older games, but how heavily used or abused the hardware is will depend on a number of factors, including whether or not the owner cared for his or her console, how much and how heavily it has been used, the storage conditions in which the console has been in, etc., and, unfortunately, the aging process does not stop even when you do not use something. Those components are likely going to be fragile, old, and possibly nearing the end of its life, and many of these consoles have probably already gone to landfill, but there are a few kicking around, so if you really want to buy one, I would encourage you to do so. However, most of you are probably not deeply into retro games. You guys will likely want to have the best games that have stunning graphics, like Gran Turismo 7, the latest edition of the Gran Turismo franchise. It is available on both the PS4 and PS5, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5, and most PCs can run retro games with no issues, provided that it has a decent integrated or dedicated graphics card, and it meets the specific requirements of the specific emulator you want to run, and this is also the cheapest and probably most convenient, as you can run any emulator on your system provided that the emulator runs on your operating system. A lot exist for Windows, but Mac, Linux, and even Android have also seen ports of popular retro emulators, meaning you can even play old games on your tablet or phone. How nice is that? You can also play any generation of console that has the right emulator made for that generation, and for most people, this is better than buying a pre-owned or refurbished console, and with how ancient the 5th generation is, who knows how many of those consoles are still in working conditions. Many could have failure to read discs, power supply issues, issues with the casing of the game console, or damaged buttons or failing ones, and they would most likely need a physical graphics adapter to convert the output to an HDMI-capable device such as a TV or a monitor, and this can get expensive, so unless you want to start a game console collection and play your childhood games on these consoles, it's probably better to stick with the newer stuff. These games and consoles are great and all, but all good things must come to an end, and that goes for game consoles and games too, and many games at the time were also compatible on powerful gaming PCs, which looked quite different to what they do now. We had beige boxes and cool turbo buttons back in the day, and if you had a custom PC, you would often install the operating system of your choice. Most obviously went with Windows because Linux was barely a thing in the early 90s, and Mac OS was inaccessible for free use on any device. They have incredibly strict hardware requirements that make it so you cannot run Mac OS on non-Apple hardware. This has been the case ever since the initial Macintosh released back in 1984, which prompted Microsoft to quickly rush their own competitor, which was what would eventually be named Windows, released at the end of 1985, and it quickly wiped all competition off of the market. Only Apple and the FOSS community were able to not be taken or vanish under Mr. Capitalism's attempts to conquer the PC market. Excuse the fact that we did not tell you that the very powerful Mr. Capitalism is actually Microsoft, and they will do everything they can to choke you the same way Homer Simpson does to Bart Simpson. They will tighten their grip on you and try force you to use as much of their stuff as you can. However, unlike in the game console market, you actually have a lot of choice in the PC market. Game consoles have always been fraught with game platform and backwards compatibility. Not all games were ported to all existing consoles. There has always been and always will be exclusive titles specific to certain consoles, especially the more powerful ones such as the PlayStation 5. With the PC market, however, compatibility is much less of an issue unless the game you get cannot run in the version of Windows you are using, and a lot of games usually have PC equivalents, but not always. So if you can buy a PC version of the game and do not want to use an emulator or buy an older console, buying the PC edition of the game, whether it's on disc, or nowadays, through online services, is the way to go. And buying it on disc is very cheap and can be a great way to repurpose an old computer. You could run Windows 7 for legacy games. The same goes for XP, 98, etc. All can be emulated in virtual machines, but if that does not meet the requirements, then a physical machine is definitely in need. Once again, you're dealing with ancient hardware, so it's not really worth it buying a dedicated XP-era machine, for example, unless you're a die-hard fan of XP and you really need a real computer with XP for some reason. Retro software and games is a perfect reason to use XP. Just be sure to never ever connect XP to the internet, because it's a massive security risk and it is like Swiss cheese. There are so many holes it is not funny, so you got to be goddarn careful when using XP, especially considering it's been out of support for nearly 10 years. Anyway, With all of that out of the way, I will now draw this video to a close. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. See you next video. Bye for now.